in a way is paving way for fading off of old approaches on poverty eradication. ILO 1970, 71, 72, or even the World Bank on anti-poverty oriented approaches. They largely focused on approaches for which time has gone by. Even the IMF's extended structural adjustment facility, which was trying to bring in on name of poverty alleviation, and we find in Africa how different imperatives came in terms of reducing directly the income or indirectly through reduction in social services. By the mid-1980s, African countries ended up with a major crisis, largely because the misallocation of the ODA, which they were receiving, and also the factor misallocations that led to a perpetuation of the challenges most of the African countries were facing. In 90s, we heard about the basic needs approach to address. Some work was done here at RIS, and we found that the adequate programmatic support that was required hasn't gone in terms of supporting it. World Bank and IMF led poverty reduction strategy papers, PRSP approach, also could not go far. In fact, if you see in one of the issues of world development, the summary that came out of the PRSP papers very succinctly mentions 3 points which are extremely important for us to take note of. And if you juxtapose that summary over the current initiatives led by the Prime Minister, you would see what direction we are going in. Point number 1 is about macroeconomic stability, and that has been an emphasis, and rightly so, by the Washington Consensus in terms of how macroeconomic stability may play an important role. If you remove the conditionalities attached with that and focus largely on macroeconomic stability, you would see how important it is for us to address this particular dimension. Second is political patronage to poverty alleviation programs and reforms per se. Third is social sector reforms. And friends, as you would see, the current dispensation has unleashed energies on all three. There is, and as Dr. Rajiv Kumar has been observing in his writings and his articulations of government policy, absolutely clear in terms of finance minister's commitment for macroeconomic stability. Political reforms and patronage for these programs, which are not directly heading on to poverty eradication, but Skill India, Startup India, they are actually focusing on eventual reduction. So as I said, goal 8 and 9 are the pivot of our strategy for poverty reduction. And social sector reforms are equally important. So that multidimensional redressal of this larger challenge, particularly in terms of aggregate development index, is something which is extremely important. Recently, RIS undertook a study on issues related to food security and malnutrition with World Food Programme, and the RIS team has shown, and this study is already now with Niti for discussion, how we can address multiple challenges that we have in terms of agriculture, food security, nutrition, trying to bring in all different dimensions of the challenges that we have on research and policy in terms of outreach and also in terms of capacity buildings. So friends, my short point is that SDGs are multi-domain connect, and that multiple dimension of SDGs is the real way forward when we are talking about the various initiatives for poverty reduction. I would just close by mentioning this new approach that we see, and it's important for us to realize that after 2014, Prime Minister emphasized not on social entitlement. So if you are poor, you would be given some dole. That kind of mindset has been set aside. What is being done is to expand the entrepreneurial base. And that is a new strategy which we see as part of our national strategy on poverty eradication. So expansion of that entrepreneurial base, so teaching how to fish and not giving you fish is something that is becoming a reality. The programs like Mudra, Skill India, Stand Up India, and Digital India are some of the reflections of that. The recently introduced Ayushman Bharat, there are debates and discussions on this, is something which, as I said, until unless we take care of health sector, which is extremely important in terms of addressing this issue of poverty alleviation, is important. The very focus is on aspirational districts. Again, Niti must be congratulated for leading us through this highly ambitious program of 115 districts where aspirational goals have been identified. And I really relish what Dr. Rajiv Kumar has been saying in terms of narrowing down. Instead of going on all 300 indicators, if we can narrow down to few indicators, and as Prime Minister has emphasized, us to focus on few parameters in terms of how some of these things are moving is extremely important. And then, of course, the emphasis in terms of having programs like Disha, which are trying to bring in localization. So as the trinity of Niti, UN India and RIS are moving forward with SDGs, and I'm so glad today we have representatives from state governments who are going to lead us, is in terms of localization of SDGs. And we see Niti has already emphasized in terms of how the focus has to be on district level articulation of our programs and convergence. I had already requested VC at some point to consider encouraging states to explore options in terms of addressing district level development reports, which should encourage interbalancing of the goals, which is important for encouraging district administration to see what the interlinkages of the goals are. And of course, as most of these states are going through rapid urbanization, are short of resources, RIS with Department of Economic Affairs has unleashed a major program, and yesterday in Kolkata we were there with the first in the series to focus on metro rail and what we can do with Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. AIIB is holding its annual meeting in June this year in Mumbai, and we are trying to see how infrastructure-related programs would provide the necessary traction which is needed in terms of supporting infrastructure development. So with these words, I close, and I once again warmly welcome all the state governments, our academic think tanks and partners and key commentators on poverty-related issues. Warm welcome to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sachin. Now I request our friend, Mr. Yuri, UN Resident Coordinator, to give his remarks.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, Honorable Vice Chair, friends from RIS, NITI, Mosby, our colleagues from state governments, academia, journalists and colleagues from the UN. I think it's always difficult. It's supposed to come up. It is always difficult to speak after Sachin, who covers all of my points, and certainly before the Minister of Rural Development and the Vice Chair of NITI, because clearly they will give you a lot more strategic detail assessment and government intentions than I ever can. So what I would like to focus in my brief remarks are three things. One, Sachin just spoke quite a bit about the interconnectedness of the Sustainable Development Goals and the multi-dimensional poverty concept. This is available on the net, and you can log into our site on UN and India, even on your phones, and view it at any time you choose. But this is essentially, I think, a graphic visualization of what he was just referring to. I know in the back rows you cannot read, which is why I'm referring to the website, and the screen is a bit small to have all the text, but the point that I'm making is that we frequently, over decades, referred to poverty frequently as income poverty. And that is correct. It is primary. And when the Prime Minister and the Minister wants to focus on doubling farmer incomes, there is nothing wrong. It's absolutely the correct approach, because unless people have incomes, they cannot realize any other aspirations that come afterwards. However, the complexity of poverty and the way poverty is moving in the future is quite challenging. Now, you will hear today in the very well-constructed panels with a lot of professional speakers from academia, UN agencies, government, etc., referrals to the universal health coverage. We know that about 60 million people reverse back into poverty just because of high medical bills and costs. There will be conversations today about education, because if poor people and young generations cannot have access to education, the perpetuity of poverty is highly likely. We will hear probably about the connections between malnutrition and education and poverty, because unless a child gets an opportunity to develop his or her learning capabilities by the age of 10, there is a high degree of probability that he or she will already be delayed in his learning and capability to join an increasingly complex workplace in the new emerging economy when he or she becomes 18, 20, 25, etc., because the numbers will have already been stacked against them. Now, the trends in India, and here I dare to be slightly optimistic at the risk of enraging the wrath of the VC against me, because he's always so critical and does not allow me to speak positively. The trend over the last 15 years in India, or 20 years, in terms of eradicating poverty is very positive. I mean, clearly we speak about the role of the achievements in China connected to the SDGs, the previous agenda of global development. And clearly China has done an amazing thing of, hundreds of millions of people taken out of poverty. And today the estimation is that the remaining kind of poverty load in China is about, 60 to 80 million people. In India, the numbers are still higher. I mean, depending how you count, we're looking at between 250 and 300 million Indians still in poverty. But having said that, if you look at the trajectory from 1992 or 95, you will see that India has achieved the halving of poverty rates from an average of 45%, 43% at that time to around 22% today. But if you look at multidimensional poverty, we're still looking at about 500 million, right? We're still looking at a large amount. So while one needs to focus on income poverty, as Sachin just referred to, integrated focus on the agenda and integrated focus on those left behind in India with specific focus on specific groups, specific geographic areas is still highly warranted. The interesting story, I'm sure it's not new to the well-versed academics in this room, is that no matter kind of what aspect we look at, we still encounter kind of the same number. We are still looking at around 200 to 200 million people. So the exclusions, they overlap. So if we look at income poverty, we will have a certain set of populations and geographic locations. If we look at access to health and education, it will again overlap significantly. If we look at access to energy or to infrastructure, it will again very much overlap. So I think when NITI focused on very recently on the 115 aspirational districts, I think the attempt was made to actually find where all those circles largely overlap. It's not a very precise exercise, but it's close enough to allow both the government, civil society, us, and business ultimately to focus on those areas, because resolution of the poverty situation in those areas will largely lead to a gradual but pretty quick elimination of extreme poverty across the country. I think it's quite notable that today we have chairing our session the Minister of Rural Development, because for the last 70 years and still largely today, poverty in India has been largely rural. But, and here's the kind of the last point I want to raise in my opening remarks, is that, look, I think we're getting to a point in India where we are starting to be able to measure things precisely. We are getting to a point where programs have been rolled out to deal with various aspects of poverty, whether it's electrification of villages or rural development or doubling of farmers' incomes or other things. So that is all good, although implementation and the results of those programs, which NITI and other ministries are attempting to track today with a high degree of accuracy. So the implementation of that will certainly be important in terms of how poverty is alleviated. But I think we also need to look beyond the next 5 years. I think, speaking as an economist, it is clear to us and to many that in the next 10 to 12 years, India will double its GNI per capita, given continuation of moderate to high growth. So between 6 and 10%, GNI will double. I believe personally, and this may be reaching too far, that in 10 years, our understanding and discussions on poverty will be completely different from what they are today. So I think looking forward and seeing where India is going, where the global economy and trade are going, what the economy, both manufacturing, services, agriculture and rural development will look like 10 to 15 years from now, allows us to understand what will be the challenges of tomorrow while we are trying to solve the challenges